This podcast is supported by VPLA, Victorian Planning Environmental Law Association. Welcome to the Planning Exchange, where we interview built environment professionals who are doing interesting work beyond the ordinary. I'm Jess Noonan, and I'm joined by my colleague Peter Jewell. Today on Planning Exchange, we're discussing one of the most pressing challenges facing cities: how to create whole housing within established neighbourhoods. A recent article in the Wall Street Journal suggested that in California, one of the few realistic ways for many younger people to end up owning a home today is simply to inherit one. Nearly 1 in 5 property transfers in the state now occurs through inheritance, roughly double the national rate, reflecting extremely high housing prices and a system where homes often remain in the same family for decades. This raises some interesting planning questions. If housing supply in established areas is effectively locked in place, how can cities grow? And can smaller, incremental forms of development help unlock opportunities that large projects alone cannot deliver? Our guest today is Jared Jones, founder of Middle Housing Partners. Jared has spent more than 15 years working in real estate development and focuses on what is often called micro infill housing, accessory dwelling units, duplexes, triplexes, and other small projects that fit within existing neighbourhoods. Today we'll explore how incremental housing works in practice, how planning systems enable or constrain it, and whether thousands of small projects might reshape cities just as much as a few large ones. So Jared, welcome to Planning Exchange. Now, I think you're one of our first guests from the States who has actually been to Australia.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Jared, could you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you came into housing development?
Yeah, so I started out as a real estate finance person. So I did mortgages for a little bit right before the housing crash in 2008. And then at that time, I had the appropriate license. And so I was also starting to do some real estate sales and investment. And at that time, there was an unprecedented opportunity to buy beat up houses and fix them up. So I started flipping houses, and over the last 20 years, I've flipped almost 500 homes, just under. I just started holding some of those properties and figuring out more and more construction projects. And it's kind of morphed into where we're at today, which is build to rent developers.
And so your work focuses on that micro infill housing. What does that term actually mean in practice to you?
I mean, basically what we do is we're not going out and looking for the big projects that require a long entitlement process. We're looking for projects that leverage existing infrastructure, the streets, the gutters, all of that, and essentially put people back into their places. From that perspective, usually the lots have an existing structure on them that we're using. And then we may go from 1 to 10 or 1 to 3 or 4 units. It's a lot of what we call quiet density. And so we're adding units in spots where lots of times people don't even know anything additional has come to be on the property.
Is there a minimum scale that you generally look for, whether that be, a duplex, triplex, apartments? Is there a minimum?
So today, where we're at in our business, we won't touch any project where we can't add at least 3 units. Where we started, we needed to add 2 units. But the bulk of our projects now are 10 plus units that we do.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the sweet spot.
Yeah.
Jared, just mentioned in the introduction the recent article in the Wall Street Journal that in California, one of the few realistic pathways for younger people to end up owning a home is simply through inheritance. Does that observation resonate with you from what you see in the housing market?
100%. It is. There was a narrow window of time where I'm 43, so where people in like that exennial, millennial kind of space were able to afford because of the crash. But since probably about 10 years ago, it's just become completely untenable for somebody with an average job to go out and actually buy a house unless they're inheriting it or they've had some windfall of some sort. So the American dream, at least in California, is all but dead.
Jared, that has so many, and also Jess, that has so many knock-on effects to the well-being of society for the
Yes.
next generation, household formation, loneliness, stability, and also hope in the future.
Mm.
I mean, I'd love to hear what you've got to say about that, Jared, and also Jess, what you both got to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I could not agree more. So our deputy governor, Eleni, shoot, I can't pronounce her name, but properly, Kalinakis, I believe. But she said something that resonated with me last year at this speech. And it was, this isn't a housing crisis. This is an everything crisis. It affects mental health. It affects like vacations. It affects the main street, like who can eat out, like all of the different pieces. And the other thing that I think it really affects and impacts deeply is our sense of community and community participation. Like if you're commuting 75 miles or whatever so that you can survive and find an affordable place, well, you're not getting home in time to coach soccer. Like you're not able to run down to the pub and grab a beer with your buddies very often. Like it's not the kind of life that people actually want to live. So yeah, the impacts are so deep and the ripple effects literally touch everybody's life in our community.
I think it's also the incidental things like being able to walk down to a cafe, walk down to the pub, as you say, walk children to school or to daycare or to kinder, and all the things that come with that experience of walking the street,
Yeah.
whether it be running into people, running into neighbors, having a discussion about, I don't know, things like your lawnmower or, things like that, or just
Yeah.
making small talk with neighbors that does create that sense of community.
Yes. No, I mean, that is I don't know, this may not translate. I don't know if you guys ever saw Leave It to Beaver, but, it's the American TV show in the 50s and 60s, and it idealizes that neighborhood dynamic. And so that thought process of the Leave It to Beaver, that's what everybody, like, wants. The problem is when we've built the communities the way that we have, that that can't happen anymore. Like, first of all, the families that are inheriting these properties, like you're still in a situation where there used to be 6 people in a house, and now there's only 2. And so you don't have kids riding their bikes on the street. You don't, you know, walk out and pick up your paper and see your neighbor because first of all, you're waking up and leaving at dark and you're getting home at dark. But secondly, like you just have so many less people in these suburban neighborhoods that you had when we grew up. And so from my perspective, the the way that our housing economy has worked for the last 40 years in California has gutted the the society that we once loved.
And Joe, can I ask in terms of planning constraints, you're obviously quite involved in your projects. What do you see from a planning perspective as being one of the key drivers that is is forcing that situation?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Or is it
You
not?
know,
It may not be impacting your developments in the States as
oh
much.
no, no. Oh, it definitely is. Look, I think that unfortunately, I believe in I don't believe in villains. I believe in systems, not people. And so I believe that over the last 40 to 50 years in the United States, that our zoning and planning has taken such a turn towards a fear of offending the neighborhood, a fear of doing something that you could get in trouble for later, or get sued for. In California, everybody sues everybody over everything. Like that's just that's the way that it goes. And so it's this pain avoidance, and the pain is not the lack of housing. The imminent pain is your boss yelling at you for being too hasty to approve something, or your one of the neighborhood committees coming in and blowing you up. And so what has been incented behavior for the people sitting behind the planning and zoning desk is protect the community at all cost. And what that actually means is a little bass backwards from my perspective. It's like, you want to protect the community, you got to give them houses. But the reality is, what happens is that in this protection, they're actually slowing the process so much so that it makes it untenable to build. And so that's really what we're seeing. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But ultimately, the identity of protector is what these planning departments have taken on. And with that, it has caused one of the reasons that we've seen a massive slowdown in housing creation over the last 20 to 30 years.
It's all choices, isn't it, Jared? It's all choices. But one thing that many people admire about the United States is the diversity of regulatory systems. So you've got 50 states, you've got cities within those states. So you've got this, I think it's a laboratory, isn't it? Someone described it as the 50 states of laboratory. So there must be many places in the states that are doing it well. Am I being naive?
No, I would not say that that's naive. I would say that it's funny because you look on a map and see where people have flown, or like flowed, however you would say that, where they flow over the last 10 years. And what you find is that the places that are easy to build, that's where they're flowing. Like, because that's where housing is more affordable. And it's funny, like I tell people this doesn't translate directly because I speak in Fahrenheit, but I tell everybody with California, people don't leave California because they don't love 70-degree Thanksgiving. California is a great place to live, but they do leave because it's not affordable. But they will go to Texas, even if that's not necessarily where they want to be. But if it's where they feel like they can maintain that mental health, where they can have a decent life and go on a vacation every once in a while, that's where they're going to go. And so the state has started to notice that attrition, which is kind of how our company came to be. Is as they've started solving for that problem, they started modifying our laws and processes to look a lot more aggressive to start creating the housing we need.
I think the word, Jess, is migration, interstate migration. That's the planning
Yes.
term, Jared. Sorry, Jess, do you have to say?
I was just going to talk about the missing middle. I think that's a very similar issue that we have in Australia, in Melbourne in particular, in Victoria, where we are, that missing middle, which is inevitably extremely political, as you sort of mentioned before, Jared. It's that push and pull between not upsetting the neighbours, not upsetting the community, ensuring that new development is consistent with neighbourhood character and all those sorts of things. But as a result, what comes out of that is just really an absence of any real development in that middle ring. And, we're seeing everything being put into CBD areas and in greenfield areas, which is obviously the very middle, so the very central areas and the very external areas of our cities. So it sounds like it's a very similar issue where you are as well.
Yeah.
I just wanted to talk through planning systems and regulation. So your work obviously sits at that intersection of policy and development. Where do the planning systems, do you think, so moving outside of just talking about the missing middle, which we've just kind of covered, where do you think planning systems create other obstacles for the smaller housing projects? Are there other things that we should be considering?
A lot of like we were just talking about it this morning in our stand up, and some of the fees that you're paying for these lots that are occupied to add an additional unit, they could be 30,000. There's one right now in Orange that we're doing So the city of Orange, which is real close to Disneyland. And the fee for adding another 750 square foot unit because of its classification type was $38,000.
Do you mean the
And
application fee for the planning?
it's a park fee is about half of that. So, but the parks fees, I'm not going to say there's a whole long conversation on that, but they are about half of the development fees. Well, the question is, like, what new parks are they building in the neighborhood because I added the 750 square foot unit? And so there's some bills that are in process right now in California to do away with some of those for these infill projects. But it's things like that. And then a lot of the other major issues that we see are just the timelines for utilities, for example. Like you can have a unit complete and sit for 7 months waiting for utilities. And then it's like all of these little pieces of the process that really harm the predictability. It's really the friction that makes it so that people choose not to develop again so quick or at all, especially in this missing middle product, because the incremental win is not so awesome to take on all of the pain and the risk if it's not a very smooth and predictable process.
And is that challenge with the servicing to do with a lack of resources from those organizations?
Yeah, I mean, that's a complicated question. It definitely depends on the municipality because over here we have like, I don't know, uh, 70 power companies in our area. And so like you start looking at each individual thing and not all of the processes are the same. They're publicly and privately owned. Like there's so many factors. And so it's not always the same thing. But in general, I would say the bulk of it is lack of accountability. I don't think it's so much about resource. It's like we're putting in power lines down the street and you can wait. And it doesn't matter that it'll take us half a day to do what we need to do with you. You can wait for 4 weeks because it's just how it is.
Okay.
I think, Jared, there was a study done here that half the cost of a new residential lot in a greenfield location, half the cost is either government charges or levies. And that never used to be that way. I mean, the cost of government seems to be, and also probably upset a few listeners, but a lot of the green regulation, which might have marginal impact on the benefits, is also adding to construction costs and whatever. Does that resonate with you a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, so absolutely, especially when you're talking about that greenfield development, like a huge portion is in relation to that. Like specifically like the environmental cost. There's what we call, it's an acronym, but CEQA is the California Environmental Program. And our projects are exempt from CEQA. And so that is not a massive cost for us, but for large developers, it is. Like sometimes the horizontal cost are just as much as the vertical cost. Like it's pretty wild. I was just consulting with a company called Invitation Homes. They're owned by BlackRock. They're a big build to rent developer. And we were talking about one of their projects specifically that was greenfield. And yeah, their cost of vertical was almost identical to their horizontal cost. And that is wild to me. And so it does have to do with all of those kinds of things. And right now, the fees in our area represent about 10% of the build cost for
Can you just explain,
Sure.
the horizontal and vertical concept, what those terms mean for our listeners?
Yeah. And so basically, before you start going up with your project, it's all of the cost to get you, ready to build. And so basically half of the cost of building has nothing to do with the actual structure, which that that becomes pretty wild. And so it's all of the pieces, it's road improvements, it's studies, it's all of the different things that go into it. But yeah, I mean, it has gotten very, very expensive to be able to build this kind of a unit.
And Jared, we spoke briefly earlier about, the difficulties in managing or transitioning change in neighborhoods. So obviously that is a fairly significant part of middle ring housing and the type of housing that you're involved in. How do you navigate that neighborhood resistance in the projects that you're working on? How does that dynamic work?
Well, we're in a unique position, and that is that the laws that we use, the neighborhood has no say in. And so there's no planning commission, there's none of that. Now they may come and complain to the city, and then the city has to say to them like, "Hey, this is state law. There's nothing we can do about it."
And
So
and can you just explain why that is? Is that a zoning quirk that you're able to utilize?
So what California has done because of the pain of our housing, like we need 3.5 million housing units in a state of about 14.5 million housing units. So basically every three houses you see, we need a fourth. And with that, the state's gotten really aggressive. One of the things that they found that was stopping it, the housing creation, was neighborhoods. And so they took the power out of the hands of the neighbors. So the laws that we use that are these small infill developments just skip that part of the process. And so that's what it does, though, which is interesting. And I think that this is something that California just proved actually with the Supreme Court. I think it's pretty interesting, but that basically these issues, like I know that you guys are in Melbourne, right? But Melbourne's not like that's a metropolitan area, right? You've got so many districts and councils that have their own rules and zoning. And it's the same thing in California. You can call it a different, you can say it's in the same city, but LA has like, I don't know, a bajillion cities. Like there's so many. And so the reality is, this is not a city problem. This is a regional and a statewide issue. And so the state has created standardized zoning for these kinds of products across the entire state. So I can do the same thing in San Diego as I can do in Sacramento, as I can do in San Jose. And so that's really important for anybody that wants to know, hey, can I buy this product and build? Can I scale? Am I willing to take that risk? Knowing that those pieces are removed, that neighbors can't stop you, is valuable. So that's the like the legal application portion, but then there's still the social application portion where nobody wants to be the asshole that goes in and ruins everybody's life, right? And so that thought process, how we deal with that is a little bit different, you know? And so we do still have to deal with that process. And oftentimes what we find is that so we're kind to the neighbors and tell them, look, we understand. Like we put up fencing, we do the things that we can to make it as clean and nice a job site as possible. We restrict our work hours, things like that. But really, what ends up happening 90% of the time is that neighbors approach us towards the end of the project or even at the end of the project and say, hey, we saw what you did here. Do you think you could help us do the same thing? And oftentimes they're the ones that had complained about it, but now they've had a change of heart when they see, hey, it's not actually ruining the neighborhood. Plus, my mom needs a place, you know?
Jared, you've worked on hundreds of projects. What are some of the practical hurdles developers like you face when trying to deliver small scale housing? I expect one of them is design. I mean, there's the financial things which you've talked about, but the practical design things, each site is different. You must have good designers working on board. Can you tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about that process?
Yeah, so definitely that's been a major challenge for us. And we started out contracting out design, and about a year and a half in, we realized like that a lot of the things that weren't moving through the process well had to do with not only who we hired, but the attention and bandwidth that they could give to it. And a couple years in, we realized like we'd spent 600,000 that year on design fees, and we're like, shoot, we can actually bring on multiple employees for that and have more direct control and say over what goes into our product. And so that was about 4 years ago. And now we have 22 on our design team with architects and engineers. And by the way, at the beginning, we had some pretty crappy floor plans too. like, so there are a lot of constraints there. But yeah, you're right. It's a different site every time. And so we've had to change a lot of things up. We've learned a ton. If you would have told me 5 years ago that I would own a design company, I would have told you you were out of your mind. But now it's not also with what we do, it's not just the design. It's understanding when the municipalities come back and are violating what the state law is based off of the comments that they're giving, based off of their timelines and all those things. Our team has to also be cross-trained in how do you speak legalese. Slash, I mean, most of that's handled by a couple of the partners, but ultimately it is in this kind of world, it is knowing the rules better than the cities and also being able to design something that people want to live in.
We thank Victorian Planning Reports, our very first supporter. If you want the A to Z of planning decisions in Victoria and excellent editorials, please get yourself a subscription to the VPRs. Details on our website. We would like to thank Alderson Properties, a terrific sponsor of the podcast. Great people, great properties. Details on our website.
So we were just at the point of talking about the debating criticism. So some critics, I think, going back to this conversation of the value of infill housing, that some critics argue that that small scale housing that we're talking about here, whether that be duplexes, triplexes, small apartment buildings, that they won't meaningfully actually change the housing shortage and the housing crisis that a lot of the cities around the world are actually experiencing, and that cities need much larger interventions. What do you say to that? And do you agree with that? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I love that. It makes me smile so much. I think that California is the best test case for this ever. And what I will say is people that preserve those kinds of thought processes are the people that typically benefit from them. And we are a part of the Builders Industry Association here in California. And there's just a newsletter that just came out talking about how master plan communities are the only thing that's worked for the last 50 years and the only thing that'll work in the 50 years to come. And they addressed ADUs in that email. And it specifically said that basically that they're cute, but it's not a real thing. And so that's a paraphrase, but really what that ignores is that 30,000 units last year, or the latest data that we have, 30,000 units out of 100,000 units of creation were created with ADUs in California. So 30% of the housing market. Well, the laws that surrounded ADUs in 2023 and 24 are different than what they allowed today. And so 2 years ago, I was putting 2 units on a lot. Today, I'm putting 3 to 14 units on one lot. And so I'm not the only person that's doing that. We're not the only group. And this is about to blow up. In California, I believe in the next 2 years that you will see our development volume at least double, maybe triple. And the bulk of that will be by these missing middle infill projects because it is not only financially viable, but it is also the very, very demanded product. It's what we actually need. And the incentives are not aligned for large developers to do this, but they are definitely aligned for small developers to do it.
And do you think, is the community looking back at some of the projects that are happening and saying this has ruined the neighborhood character, or is it predominantly positive?
Well, back to my statement about people that do have the negative or like opinions on this kind of stuff, or the naysaying opinions, they tend to be the people that benefit from systems the way that they are. And so, you know, the bottom line is predominantly there is positive response. However, there's still negative response, but it's from somebody that bought their home in the Leave It to Beaver days, and they bought it for two hay pennies and a nickel. And, their life, they don't even have a mortgage payment as a part of their expense that is meaningful. I like to look at it this way. I'm like, look, a nurse that got a job 20 years ago could afford a house without any problem on one income. That same person, the same kind of job, same pay, could try to move into a house today, and they would need to have three nurses' salaries in our market to be able to buy the same house. And so it's not that. So the people that are not benefiting from it are the ones that are complaining. The people that are benefiting from it, or their children are benefiting from it or whatnot, like those are the people that are super excited to see that there's some tenable way for somebody that they love to be able to have stability in housing. Yeah, so an ADU is an accessory dwelling unit. So that means that you have to have a primary dwelling unit on the property. And that could be a duplex, a triplex, it doesn't really matter, but there needs to be something existing. And so when we started out, that was all of our business. Now there's multiple other options for small lot subdivision and townhomes and things like that we're using. But that's where we built our muscles, is on the ADU. And we still use it every day. Yeah, I mean, look, I think that my viewpoint obviously is my incentives are aligned to create housing. I view it as a positive lesson in inclusion. Like this whole thought process that because our neighbor is putting in a unit, we should be able to say something about it and stop the process. Like, I don't love that. I don't think that's great. And if we want affordable housing in the United States specifically, especially in California, that suburban sprawl takes a tax on people. And when we're concerned, I mean, you talked about environmental impact. I mean, what's the environmental impact of putting in 10 new miles of street? And then what's the strain on the infrastructure, like of the actual city, for doing those things, versus if you have a backyard that is massive and could hold another 7 units, what is the impact on that community from that thing? And so I think that one of the things that is a lesson is that if we just re-envision what we already have, oftentimes there are workable paths to create the solution that we never even really saw. And so I believe that everybody in California is concerned about, why is everybody disappearing from downtown? Like, why Main Street is getting ruined? Well, because there aren't enough people to go to Main Street. And even if there were, they don't have the money to go there because they're spending too much on housing. And so if we look at the kind of community that we want to live in, then we need people to be in that community. And the people in that community, if we want to live in a great community, are going to be living a stable life. They are going to be able to survive and feel like they belong and feel like they matter, and that As we see that and we look at these zoning ordinance and the laws that cities and states make, we have the opportunity to look at the people from a perspective of where do we want our kid to live? Do we want our kid to be able to visit us with the grandkid? Do we want our mom to be able to retire close to us? Like these are the things that we need to think about and then enact policy that actually sees those people, the people that are on the margins. And if we do that, then I believe that we can come back to that Leave It to Beaver neighborhood that we wanted to see. And yeah, we won't have big lawns, but that's okay. It was never about the lawns. It was about the people.
And Jared, if you could change one planning rule tomorrow to unlock more housing in established neighborhoods, what would it be?
It would be that we do not have to go through a planning department. Like we literally can just meet objective standards and have somebody else sign off on it so we don't experience delays. And if that was the case, literally the market would build what it demands and it would slow down when it needs to slow down because there's too much housing. And wouldn't that be such a lovely problem? Hmm. Yeah, it's systems, not people. Like most of the people that are in opposition to you, they're just protecting their identity. Like they're trying to protect whoever it is they identify with. And there is usually a workable path when you can see somebody for who they are, not the role that they're trying to play at the moment.
Thanks, Jared.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you would like to hear more of our podcast, hit the follow button on Spotify or the like button on SoundCloud or the subscribe button in Apple Podcasts. Please also visit our Instagram page, LinkedIn, or website for behind the scenes footage of our podcasts and to get the latest on upcoming or recently released episodes. If you have any suggestions or feedback, please get in touch via our social media channels or by emailing planningxchange@gmail.com.